Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to have the opportunity of having a chat with David Burrowes, the chairman of the Equity Release Council. The date today is the 8th of April. We are in very interesting times and uncharted waters here. So I thought it would be apt to try and speak to a number of industry leaders to get some real sort of insight and perspective. The industry, all of us as in the advising community, have had a huge amount of information in the last couple of weeks, which is good because it shows that our sector is vibrant, still moving forward and still very much open for business. But we've got to try and hopefully cut through some of the mass information and get down to good old brass tacks. So I thought we'd start that process off with a chat with David today. So David, welcome and thank you very much for taking time out.
No, pleasure.
We've had a number of questions come in from advisors that we've garnered in the last few days. They're obviously keen to get some straight answers, and I know that you like to talk straight and give straight answers. So I think if we just start off with something really is, where do you see the sector at the moment, and what are the core challenges, just as an oversight, and then we'll go into the specific questions.
Yeah, well, obviously the nature of the situation we're in is that we're in a shared enterprise of shared impact by what we are all facing in terms of seeking to respect government measures to limit the spread, reduce the impact of COVID-19. And so plainly, we're not in any way immune from that, but we're obviously also taking stock as an industry, aren't we, of the impact of that, and particularly impact in relation to social distancing measures and the requirement, the instruction, all of us to stay at home where at all possible. I think there's also the other side to it, which we recognise as not least as a trade body, the need to support, whilst we're wanting to respond, and as we'll talk later, how we can in a meaningful way help keep the business going in the best interests of consumers and protect them, as we've always sought to do throughout the history of the council. We also recognise that there's very individual impacts of what's happened. So we represent in a diverse industry, with advisors, with those providing the equity release we have lawyers, we have surveyors, we have networks, we have a whole range of members who all have been individually impacted. So we want to help support, and through our website provide ongoing support, because this has impacted on people's physical and mental well-being, and so we want to provide that support as well as be out there very much in a respectful but front foot way to provide reassurance for consumers who are of course older and themselves likely to be isolated, particularly at this time, and they will have many questions that they want answered now, and even more so now, about their financial needs and their circumstances and their families. And we want to make sure that we are there to help and ensure that we can support the industry in providing those answers for what, as we know, it's very much a long-term commitment in relation to equity release, but we are all impacted by short-term concerns and needs, and so we're wanting to very much be part of that. But plainly, there's been the challenge, hasn't there, that in an industry which predominantly is around a face-to-face element across the advice spectrum of financial and legal advice, that has been impacted by the government guidelines, and we've sought to respond to that, as we'll talk shortly, in relation to the up to now the one of the gold standards of face-to-face legal advice. But I suppose the context to it is that we want to remind ourselves, obviously across the financial services there's been an impact. There's a particular significant impact on the residential market at present, understandably so. But I think we have to recognise that over these, in fact, the last year, as we've seen, not the same trajectory of growth. Nevertheless, we do have a robust and resilient market in equity release, and that comes out of increasing product choice and affordable rates, and the ongoing and underlying and continuing consumer demand for what I think is a very vital product of great social and economic worth and value. And it does meet vital social and financial needs. So, a customer will still have an ongoing concern, perhaps even more so, about day-to-day living, their care, debt repayment, emergency house repairs. And so we see that there's such an ongoing need for equity release, and that we need to ensure that we respond very sensitively and respectfully to government guidelines, but enable that we can help ensure throughout the market chain that we put the customer's interests paramount and first. And they're all acting, aren't we, in the public interest? We are in that spirit, aren't we, of not looking to ourselves, but trying to collectively, in a solidarity, do what's right. And we can do that in relation to equity release in the context of government's guidelines. And that's what we've sought to do in the last couple of weeks, particularly, is really work very hard, not least with our lawyer members, to try and come up with an option in relation to an alternative to the straightforward, normal face-to-face legal advice.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that's really good sort of summary there, David, of where we are facing into at the moment. That leads me naturally into, I guess, the next question. Last week, the council said it was relaxing its rules. They came out with some quite detailed definition around that, around the face-to-face legal advice. Can you just explain the measures the council have now actually taken, and what were the challenges in coming to that solution, and how did it come about, really?
Yeah, and as you said, Stuart, what the council has been its sort of USP is about standards. It's what's got us as to be a council in the first place. And whether it's in unprecedented times or normal times, our standards matter. And that's what we're focused on, and consumer protections and the principles and the outcomes underpinning them. And the reasons why we care about principles and outcomes is that when we look at a rule that's been particularly challenged by the circumstances we're in, and not least the government guidelines, which currently don't make it particularly possible for clients to visit solicitors' offices, and solicitors may well not be able to easily travel to a client's home, then we have to look at our rule, which our rule was very much about that face-to-face legal advice. There has to be one particular time when we would normally have expected a solicitor to have that face-to-face interaction with a client. And we recognise that, at the end of the process, there's that signature, there's that physical witnessing of a signature of a mortgagee. That's a legal requirement as well, that has and is still the case and is required. So we were looking at our rule and looking at, okay, so we needed to consult quickly with our members. So we sought to do that over the period of time, in fact, when we had the government reacting to the virus and coming up with guidelines, firstly in relation to social distancing, and then during our consultation, the lockdown. And so we came to the conclusion, in fact, decision back, time goes by, it merges in many ways, doesn't it, moment, but the 20th of March it was, I think, when we basically just decided that we would allow temporary modification of what we call our Rule 8, which is about that face-to-face advice. And that was, very much temporary during this period of restricted movement and social distancing. And we fully expect, obviously, we'll return to the normal gold standard face-to-face. We recognise that we are retaining that gold standard if and when guidance allows. But we're really ensuring that, with this new process, it's a modification, but it doesn't change what we're about, which is maintaining product safeguards, protecting consumers' personal health and well-being. We wanted to make sure that continued, and we can go through in that detail of why we think we've done that as best we can. And also, very crucially, this isn't just sort of saying, okay, now that it's difficult to see the customer, we're going to just have a shortcut for advice. No, not at all. We've actually put increased measures in place to ensure there's mandatory contact points, as it were, remote contact points, if that makes sense, between the customers and the legal advisors. You've got the onboarding, the client onboarding mandatory point. You've got the mandatory establishment of identification. You've got then the mandatory provision of legal advice on offer. That's the third mandatory contact point. And then the fourth is sort of the mandatory pre-completion check. Now, there's going to be different ways that solicitors will operate around that. but that's crucial because, the principles which underpin all this in our standards is that, whatever happens, the client's identity must be fully established. And secondly, the client must look at the issue of mental capacity to ensure they've got the proper capacity to enter into an equity release contract. Thirdly, that that in order to check that the client is not under duress or coercion, important, particularly in these vulnerable times we're in as well, as they seek to enter into this contract, and that where there's there's more than one party, to make sure that both have agreed. So that those are the principles, and we've sought to make sure those principles are maintained, and that we in this new process, and we've set out, and anyone can look at the Equity Release Council's website, we've set out a map that sets out these contact points, as well as guidelines and guidance that are in with the amended solicitors. So that sort of sets out what we're about, if that is clear enough to you there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for the advisors, they've really been, I suppose, faced up until the council came out with that leadership, really, because that's what this boils down to. Council being seen as, God, we go back 27 years to the old SHIP standards. They've led the industry strongly forward to a set of parameters that advisors can, with confidence, deliver good quality advice and structure to, and that providers can work with and work to as well. And I think now it's been a really good reflection of where the council position themselves, and I'm delighted to see all the hard work. And I think it would be remiss not to mention that for everything that is seen in that document, there is, like the iceberg, so much work that's been worked behind the scene by all the council members, the standards board, the different solicitors. So I think what we've really got to say to the advising community now is talk to the solicitors. Never has there been a more apt and appropriate time to engage. We've got a panel with Adlington Law and Ashfords and Equilaw, or other specialist firms, solicitors that are highly operational within this sector. But for the advisors, talk to your solicitor firms, find out what their particular way of interpreting these rules is going to be. Their preference, I guess, as everybody's is to get to that gold standard, if at all possible, if we can, and to get back to that once social movement restrictions are lifted. But it's good to see that all that work has now got to the point where we can, as an industry, progress through that legal process to get to a point where the solicitors are comfortable, where the clients are comfortable, where the advisors are comfortable, and where the council are comfortable. So really good, and then thank you from me on behalf of our members for all the work, and if you can pass that on to everybody that's been engaged with this, we'd be grateful for that. Thank you to be passed on.
And I want to, and very much what's been welcome has been the collaboration. Now I know as a lawyer myself, get a bunch of lawyers in a room together, it's not the easiest always to get to agreements on anything much, but particularly, I really welcome to hear that we've really, those members you mentioned there, lawyer members who've been involved, and there are different ways that people operate in this market, and some are much more used to clients coming into, and it's much more suitable for clients coming into an office, and others are involved with mobile agents, and there's different ways that firms have operated, and are now having to look at how they can operate with the current guidelines, and we wanted to make sure that we increase the options available to recognise that there is a practical difficulty in the current guidance we have to be able to physically have those face-to-face interactions, and to ensure that we now have that additional option available. But really want to thank those lawyers who came together to help really work hard, and also then reaching out across the advisor community and the provider community, and obviously linked up with the lenders as well, to collaborate as quickly as possible. And obviously there's still work to be done with a number that are still looking at what they can bring to market in the current circumstances. But we already see this week that there are options out there to ensure that the equity release business continues, and continues in a way that does and has at its heart good consumer outcomes, and that's important. I suppose it's worth just mentioning what one of the challenges which is goes above and beyond our modification, but is still important to recognise, is that there is, and still is, in fact, it's just been reported today by the BBC after representations made by the Law Society to the Ministry of Justice, that there is no relaxation of the physical attestation issue. In fact, the context which Law Society is looking at particularly is in relation to the attestation of wills, and the need for 2 independent witnesses. Now, in our mortgage deed, there's a need for that 1 independent witness, and in our gold standard, it would be the solicitor ensuring that takes place properly with all the due diligence. We're continuing to want to ensure that due diligence continues and there's verification of identity of that witness. But there is, under the English law, obviously, the requirement for that physical witness of a client's signature to the mortgage deed. And so that is an aspect which will continue to be a challenge, and that one will have to look at ways to ensure that does get processed properly. And we made representations to the Law Society about that issue, as well as the issue of solicitors in this whole process being key workers, as they're presently not designated as such. And we're seeking to make those representations to the Law Society, and indeed to the Minister, the Economic Secretary, the Treasurer around this, to make sure that, I see our crucial roles is obviously, it continues around the standards, the continuance of those standards in the climate we're in at the moment, as well as that representational arm, to make sure that the particular issues that are affecting our industry are brought to bear to those that can have an influence going forward.
Thank you, David. I think that really, for advisors listening to this, is going to be quite an important thing that they've got to see as maybe being different as we move forward. The gold standard for those firms. So, like I said, talk to your legal firms, talk to those firms on the panels. If they're going to deliver the gold standard using still respecting social distancing and health and safety and COVID-19 avoidance skills, rubber gloves and separate pens, and I mean, it sounds almost a comedy situation of witnessing things through windows, but solicitors will be doing everything they possibly can to maintain the safety of the customer, which is the paramount thing here. If the solicitor is adhering to the gold standard, then that witnessing of that mortgage deed is still going to be done in one process. If, I guess, the witnessing is done as a separate thing, are there any specific differences that advisors should be aware of? So if they go for the remote option, the non-face-to-face, which is now available, any particular issues around that sort of signing and witnessing? I guess it's important to understand it can't be the beneficiaries of the equity release, that sort of thing.
So I think if you're unable to physically witness your client's signature to the mortgage, then it's important to establish, in fact, ideally, I think at the outset, our guidelines are saying who the client would like to use as a witness. So that's all clear. And so there's opportunity to be able to verify that identity, then to carry out the identity check against the witness and make inquiries as to their relationship with the client to establish that they're able to corroborate the client as the person signing the deed. So that is in our guidelines, and that the witness obviously must be an independent adult and not benefiting from the equity release or the client's estate. We've inbuilt that into the guidelines for attestation that would happen by an independent witness, say for example a neighbour or someone else like that. But it's challenging times, and it's not going to be easy. And I think what we'd also emphasise that there may be a situation that arises, and we've charted that out in our process map, as it were, that after all those checks and all those issues, that as we know, and we know from the council in the way we've done things, is that there's times when you actually say, no, hold on, it's not appropriate now. There's a time for hold. We pause, we wait until there's more opportunity for those checks to be carried out on a face-to-face level. And so that's built in. It's not just simply a momentum towards completion to try and get up the line. What we're concerned about all the way along is checking that the consumers are probably protected. And if there's a concern over that, then the presumption is that you will hold on that transaction. And the encouragement is for the, particularly not just the process, but it may well be in these times we're in that, fraud, duress, and coercion may, in fact, sadly be more likely. We see the we see just from our internet, don't we, some of the scams, some of the things going on and around there. And we want to ensure, as we've built up a good reputation over the years for our industry, that that properly continues. But there aren't, the reality is that, financial distress is increasing in the wake of COVID-19. So extra care we are encouraging to be taken to ensure that clients are taking extra release for their own free will. They're not being pressured by family members. What we're used to doing anyway, and what I think is where the resilience and robustness of our industry is that we've been doing this anyway in normal circumstances. And in fact, in our industry, where I think when one looks at property loans, we have the most protections around. In many ways, we come to the fore now because we've been doing this in the good times. In another context, the politician used to talk a lot about fixing the roof while the sun is shining, and we've done that. And now the sun is not shining in terms of the challenges we're facing, but what we've fixed in terms of the council and our industry standards. Now, we're now having to modify in relation to the legal face-to-face advice, but across the board, we have protections and standards that I think are really fit for purpose. But we continue to emphasise with each other that with identification checks, which are so important, those need to continue to be robust, and there'll be conversations that would happen more than usual, probably, in terms of the reasons for loan, cross-referencing with financial advisors, with the lawyers. More of that conversations would need to take place during the process so that everyone has the sufficient assurances.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think it's important for those listening to this later on that we've got to work with, we're all a partnership in this industry. There are various links in the chain and they've all got to maintain strength. And I think to work together to understand that this process is going to be a little bit more protracted than it might have been a month ago. But the essential focus is around the consumer outcome. So if it takes a bit longer, it's going to take longer with processing of applications. It's going to take a little bit longer on the legal process, but it's important we get this right. And now is not the time to cut corners and to put any pressure on the process. So I think all the stakeholders in this understand that. So that's good. Leading naturally in, David, do the council have any concerns? I think you touched earlier on duress and coercion and all the other things which we factor in on a day-to-day basis anyway as advisors. But any specific issues that are raising flags for the council and leading into work sort of streams that you're now looking at with regards to the advice process? Any concerns there?
So obviously we mentioned that we already, don't we, through all our checklists, whether as financial advisors, and then the process that we've put in place already in terms of the gold standard face-to-face advice, but also now in terms of this temporary modification to remote advice, want to ensure that there's mandatory contact points, that there's proper checks on issues like identity, but also, yes, as you said, to ensure that we are mitigating any risks in relation to duress or coercion. So those are ones which I think now, in the time when we're heightened in relation to what we ordinarily do anyway. And I suppose what is important is to recognise that, as I said before, we're in a place where there may well be a need to have more cases that are just paused or put on hold. If all the essential requirements, for example, from the solicitor's role, cannot be satisfied, then the customer will be constantly, and it will be documented, won't it? And in fact, we've made quite a lot of emphasis around the importance of documentation, of written advice being sent through, not least in the remote process, of the preference for ensuring that things are recorded on video and the like. But there may well be a need to ensure that a consumer may just prefer to wait until the social distancing has ended and they can arrange for an advisor visit or an independent witness in the normal ways. So I think we're constantly wanting to emphasise that and recognise that we're still relatively tight. Lots happen to try and move to this place, but we need just to go step by step to see exactly how things are going forward, to recognise that we're in constant contact with the FCA and with the Treasury and with the Law Society and others, that everyone is all trying to work together. And we also recognise that, I suppose, in terms of risks, that plainly, if we haven't got our gold standard directly in place for everyone to be able to use in relation to, for example, face-to-face advice, then we have to recognise that that whilst we have a process which is as robust as possible, it isn't ideal, and so we have to mitigate those risks. And I think we've done the best we can, but realise that everything needs to be properly recorded and documented to deal with the fact that down the line there may be a tail risk of a complaint about someone who, if the older person is on their own and the family members aren't able to be directly involved in the way they would normally be, for example, we would need to explain that. And so all the way through, we're wanting to ensure that the customer is very aware that this is a particular process, for example, the non-face-to-face, for a particular exceptional time, and they are at liberty to wait if they wanted to do that, because we know that there are going to be short-term pressures at the moment, hopefully not for so long, but this is a long-term commitment that they're making, and we want to ensure that they're aware of that and are ready to take that decision at the right time, whilst realising that some will not want to wait. And we've tried to give that opportunity for Equity Release to properly continue with all the different parts of the market chain working well together. And that's what I said at the beginning, that collaboration has been really helpful and really good to see that we are working well together and just trying to provide the option. We're not trying to provide more opportunity to sell, as it were. We're just trying to provide the option to get the real good quality informed advice that the customer needs at this time.
Fabulous. I think that's all really good news. And finally, I'd just like to really ask, on a more broader context, just to wrap this up, anything the council are currently addressing to help advisors, and how you see the sector really emerging after this is all over, I guess, in promoting the sector. One of the hashtags that we've been using in the last week and a half or so is the sector's open for business still. And I think that's a message that I guess the council is going to want to wave up a flagpole very sort of loud and proudly.
Very much so. And I just want to say thank you. It'll be predominantly advisors listening and watching this. Thank you to advisors. During my time as chairman, I've genuinely been impressed by the serious commitment to the consumers and passion, and not wanting to be in any other financial service, the passion for consumers, because we see the delivery of really good consumer outcomes. And I want to thank advisors, because it's a really tough time. I'm hearing that advisors some find really hard to keep things going, and just to thank them in this time of what they're doing and having to adapt to, obviously the message is obviously one that we all want to share about wanting to stay safe and look after our health and well-being, and to thank them for their vital role that they're performing, because I do believe the role that we have actually is part of a picture which is really important for our society and economy at this time we're in as well. And to thank them for, they may not be all known as key workers in the normal sense of the word, and we take a hat off to the big key workers in relation to the health service and the like, but nevertheless they are key to the important needs, not least of older consumers who are particularly vulnerable at this time. And as a council, I suppose, what going forward, we're wanting to, working at the coalface with us all, trying to, knit things together in relation to not least things like legal advice, but also be out there helping us work through this. So, we've got some plans for next Wednesday at 3:00, our webinar, when we're going to I'll be bringing together, I'm learning some tips from you in hosting this, Stuart. I'm going to be bringing together Chris Pond, our chairman of our standards board, with Claire Barker, who's also a legal representative on our standard board, who's paid tribute to her and all the hard work she's done in actually helping to bring together this detailed guidance and amendments. So they'll be coming together just to look at, very much practically work through what this is all about at 3:00. So any members of the council can tune into that, and then that'll be available to the wider public shortly after. So we're doing that. We also are making those representations on the front foot to the FCA Law Society and the ministers to tell them about what's happening in our industry, to tell them about the important role that we play, to look at help and support from them. So we're working with them and wanting to reach out to our members through our members' communications to find out and help support the particular challenges that our community is facing at this time. So yeah, we'll continue to do that, and wanting to make sure that we keep that standards going properly, and that important representational arm we have, and that support for members.
Fabulous. David, thank you very much. It only leaves me just to say that advisors wanting further information, please go to airsourcing.co.uk. There's now a special hub, COVID-19 business as usual hub, that will keep you updated on all the full details. We'll make sure that the council documentation is available for advisors as a point of reference. We'll be following up this interview with a number of other interviews on capacity, vulnerability, sales process, working remotely. So please keep going back to the website. It's being refreshed daily with all the information. And finally, but certainly not least, we'll also send out the council website for anybody who's not a member. I'd strongly advocate joining the council if you've not already done so. There's a huge amount of support, not just on this subject, but on a vast range of other subjects. So David Burrowes, Chairman of the Equity Release Council, I'd just like to say on behalf of the advisor community, thank you for you and your team and all the work that you've done, and thank you for taking valuable time out today to share your thoughts with us.
Stuart, just finally, now you from the bridge, so is that, does it mean that everyone who comes on this has to have a beard as a captain on a bridge? Is that one of the conditions of everyone having this interview?
That could be quite a challenge, David, if we ask everybody to grow beards as copious as you're managing, far better than I am, as you can see. So yes, well, thank you very much for that.